in terms of certain lines. And I went to Nepal specifically to get interviews with Dilgo Khyentse to ask him about this. And I thought he was going to send me, what, are you translating this? That's absolutely, but he never said anything like that. He did tell me there was one line with a certain term, which we didn't understand, nobody understood, including all these other lamas. And he told me, just don't translate that line, just put it in Tibetan in your English translation. And so I did. I don't know if anyone has ever noticed it, but there's a line. It's just like, it's all of a sudden there's a line in Tibetan. And I did that. But and I also spoke with Namkha Norbu about this problem as well. So I did, very thoroughly research it. And, so yeah. So that both answers the question of permission, but also the question of doing a proper translation.
Yeah, and having sort of maybe some experiential sort of insight in that. Actually, this kind of again reminds me of something you said in 2014 at the translation conference you spoke at, and you're talking about the lung and getting a transmission of a text, and how, for example, I remember when I was at Hamburg, Professor Dorji Wangchuk said to me, who started the lung? I mean, can anyone give the first date of the first lung? And this is this seems to be a very Tibetan thing, with the lung and the transmission in terms of, sort of sitting there for weeks or days getting a lung. And you mentioned this sort of kind of secret aspect of the lung, the raised eyebrow, which I think I can do one. But, is that something that, because this is what people talk about with the sort of secret material, that there should be that element of learn, that element of blessing, that element of experience coming through the translation. What do you think about that? I mean, is that present there, would you say, in your translation of that autobiography?
I feel that I could have, one thing, and I may well do it at some point, I don't know or not, I could have made the translation somewhat more poetic than I tried to make it very literal and poetic, it's not as poetic as it might be. Jigme Lingpa was a beautiful writer, and, to convey his writing in English, I should have taken a little bit more liberty with the text to make it more poetic. But yeah. I do think that the transmission is there. I think that I myself, first of all, I myself did have, some practice. I did have access to some of the things he was talking about myself, but, much more importantly, I received it from the teachers who were telling me. We went every single line, extensive discussions about what he was talking about. Like, I spaced out into the zone of, pure vision, and people were critiquing me like, don't use the word spaced out because that's like a bad term, but that's literally what it says in Tibetan. And the text operates on different levels for different readers. The notion of self-secret is there, which is that people can read it and depending on who they are will get different levels of meaning.
Yes.
I also think it's very, very important. Also, that was why I did it, was to show the world that, the Tibetan writing is not just like a blind faith sort of, doctrinal, and to show first of all, the fact that there's this kind of personal autobiographical writing is a very, very important thing in academics who are, saying that there's no such thing as personal writing in Buddhism because Buddhism doesn't believe in the self. And that's wrong. And that's a misunderstanding. That's an orientalization or essentialization. And so I think that trumps the issue about the secrecy. Yeah. So, but just to let you know that I was very worried about this too. So I was very, very careful. Not a single of these, qualified masters said, oh no, this is not a good idea. You shouldn't do this. They all understood why I was doing it, and they all encouraged me and helped me.
Okay, that's great to hear. I mean, some scholars will just translate without that, as I'm sure you know. But so speaking about space and the Dakini principle and Jigme Lingpa, of course, this is a big chapter in the book about that, which I am also very fascinated in, is the Dakini and the Dakini language. So perhaps you could just, because you talk about the Dakini in this chapter in the book, and I just read a quote here. You say, just as she, the Dakini, prevents Jigme Lingpa from becoming either too full of himself or too unfull, the Dakini herself resists being pinned down too precisely as this. And then you go on a bit further to say, and each reader would have to arouse his or her Dakini aspect in order to read and receive the message of the text. So I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to that, because first of all, there is the mystery of the Dakini, which you do sort of talk about in this chapter, but at the end of the chapter, you suggest that, in fact, Jigme Lingpa, or this Dakini talk, is actually for the Dakini, so the reader themselves have to become the Dakini to get the message. Is that right?
I think I got that interpretation from another person that I didn't mention was Khenpo Jigme Phuntsog from Sertar.
Yeah.
And I asked him, why did Jigme Lingpa say that the author of his text was the Dakini? And I believe that part of his answer was that the reader also has to become a Dakini to understand what the text is saying. And I think that's a beautiful literary theory, actually. It's about this very high level of sophisticated literary writing. That's true. And that's the power of a text, just like poetry or other kinds of very poetic writing can, change the subjective state of the reader. And in order to take in what's happening, you have to meet the author or the words halfway. So yeah, I think that's true. And again, that was so exciting. What's so exciting about this text? It's a really brilliant work. When I really tried to analyze, the more I got into it, and I realized the way he was constructing the work and all the things that